Welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping immediately into a massive stack of source material today, all focused on this, well, brewing crisis in Washington, what analysts are calling the government shutdown showdown. Okay, so our goal for you, our listeners, is really to give you that expert briefing you need right now. We want to cut through the usual political noise and, quickly grasp what's fundamentally at stake here. Because this isn't just about missing some funding deadline, right? The documents we've seen show this is a really high-stakes battle. It's over core ideological power, and it's threatening, well, institutional stability and just the basic functionality of American government.
That's absolutely essential context. When we synthesize these documents, the congressional reports, economic forecasts, the political strategy memos, the clear consensus is, well, Washington is heading toward potential chaos in 2025. And like you said, this is about far more than just red tape. It directly jeopardizes paychecks for hundreds of thousands of federal workers. It stresses our military readiness and it immediately destabilizes the lives of millions who rely on government programs.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We really have to start with the mechanism itself. What exactly is happening in Congress right now that's causing this intense, this seemingly paralyzing deadlock?
Well, what's fascinating here, looking at the sources, is that the fight is really over a specific slice of the pie, discretionary spending.
Right.
This is the part of the budget that funds, the day-to-day operations of most government agencies, everything from defense contracts and scientific research to national parks and the IRS, and it needs annual reauthorization. Crucially, it's different from mandatory spending, things like Social Security or Medicare, which is continue automatically.
Right. And because Congress can't agree on the actual budget numbers, they're sort of flirting with using a continuing resolution, a CR, as a temporary fix. But even that temporary mechanism is being weaponized now.
Exactly. A CR just, extends previous funding levels for a short time, usually 30, 60 days, something like that. But in the current political climate, that CR has become the focal point for all the ideological battles. You have one side saying, look, we will only pass a CR if it includes this new border security policy. And the other side counters, well, we'll only pass it if it specifically excludes those climate spending cuts you want. So this unwillingness to fund the government, even for just 30 days, without getting some major policy win, that's the core of the showdown.
Let's detail those specific ideological issues then, because they are, major policy heavy hitters that really affect everyone. Our sources detail basically 4 specific areas where the two sides are just diametrically opposed. Okay, first you've got the demands around border policy.
Yeah.
And this has moved way beyond just funding for the wall, right? Now it's about demanding fundamental changes in asylum law itself. Second, there's that ongoing battle over Ukraine aid. Conservatives often demanding that, any foreign spending has to be tied directly to strict domestic border enforcement metrics.
And the third and fourth points, they really involve domestic policy stability. You have this massive pressure from one side to mandate deep cuts in green energy investments, specific climate research grants, viewing them essentially as unnecessary spending. And at the same time, there's this huge political fight brewing over any proposed, quote, adjustments to Social Security, which, one side views as absolutely essential for long-term solvency, and the other sees as just breaking a promise to seniors. And the documents we've reviewed indicate that this deadlock is so profound that a missed deadline is looking increasingly probable. More likely than not, some are saying. And if they do pass that deadline without a deal, the consequences are instantaneous. Right away, we're talking hundreds of thousands of federal workers immediately being furloughed, put on unpaid leave. This means non-essential government services just stop completely.
And this is where it gets really interesting, but, well, in a terrible way, essential personnel. We sometimes forget that air traffic controllers, TSA agents, border agents, with the people keeping the immediate machinery of the country running, they'll still be working. They're mandated to show up, but they'll be doing it without getting a paycheck.
Right. And this stress, it extends right to the core of national security. The military's operational readiness immediately slows down. Now, troops are considered essential. They have to report for duty, but like you said, they're not paid during the shutdown. But maybe more crucially, the sources predict a really significant slowdown in things like specialized long-term training exercises, maintenance contracts. These aren't the things that make headlines every day, but they create a tangible degradation of defense capabilities over time. It adds up.
That brings us directly to the human impact, the true cost of using a shutdown as political leverage. As the documents shift focus to personal impact, these stories of hardship, they just become unavoidable. Why should you care immediately? Well, because real American families, often those living paycheck to paycheck, are caught right in the blast radius. Yeah, our notes detail how furloughed employees who miss even one payday face an immediate financial cliff, just straight down. And while Congress often votes later to provide back pay, that legislation, well, it often takes weeks to pass, sometimes longer. In the meantime, rent is due, mortgages are due, food needs to be got. We found one really compelling passage, actually, a quote from a furloughed TSA worker. He summed up the absurdity, saying, basically, I can protect the border, but I can't pay my electric bill. Stark.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the broader picture, social assistance, the burden is massive on vulnerable families across the country. Programs like SNAP food stamps, WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children program, housing assistance, they face immediate operational delays. And it's not because the mandatory funds aren't technically there. It's because the administrative staff, the people needed to process applications, distribute benefits, verify eligibility, they've been furloughed. The result is this bottleneck that leaves families waiting, sometimes for weeks, for absolutely vital assistance.
And okay, while everyone kind of knows the national parks will close, what about the invisible services, the crucial public functions that just stop running?
All right, let's focus on the economic engines that kind of grind to a halt. When the government shuts down, the IRS stops processing non-critical returns, it halts audits, which means delayed refunds for people, and stalled efforts to collect tax debt for the government. But maybe more importantly, federal programs crucial for business stability just stop running. Think about, say, the agricultural sector. USDA loan applications for farmers, which are vital for planting and harvest seasons, they freeze. Small business grants, housing initiatives across the country. These rely on processing agents in various federal departments. They stop too. And this creates this ripple effect of uncertainty that can destabilize local economies far, far beyond Washington.
That structural pain, it leads us right to the cynical core of this problem. Why do shutdowns keep happening? An analyst we read refer to this situation as political chess, basically arguing the shutdown mechanism itself has become institutionalized. It's seen as a key bargaining chip in Congress, used to gain leverage that couldn't be won through, regular order, normal legislation.
That's the key insight from the political science documents we looked at. For certain members of Congress, maybe those seeking big spending cuts or major ideological policy victories, the failure to pass a clean funding bill isn't actually seen as a failure of government. It's viewed as a necessary pressure lever, a tool. They can mobilize their political base by arguing, look, we were willing to risk chaos to force spending restraint or policy compliance, whatever their goal is. And this can actually reward them politically back home, even if the outcome is painful for the country as a whole.
And we can clearly define the conflicting leverage points here based on the sources. On one side, you have conservatives willing to use the shutdown threat to demand maybe non-negotiable spending cuts and much tighter immigration enforcement. On the other side, you have progressives using that same funding deadline to defend social safety net protections and continued funding for climate mitigation efforts. The shutdown becomes the hammer one side uses to try and force the other to concede major policy items, completely outside the normal legislative process. But don't the sources also highlight that this kind of brinkmanship creates immense internal friction? I mean, you mentioned conservatives demanding cuts, but surely the source material indicates that key defense hawks, maybe within the same party, are deeply uncomfortable with military preparedness falling.
Oh, absolutely they are. That internal tension is exactly what makes the situation so precarious, so volatile. The defense-focused segments of Congress, they despise this erosion of military readiness. They see the danger, but often they're overruled by members whose primary goal is achieving immediate fiscal restraint, almost regardless of the consequences to the Pentagon or global stability. And this internal conflict is what really slows down any potential last-minute negotiation. It complicates everything. And if we connect this to the inevitable political fallout, well, the immediate result is always the blame game. Once the government actually shuts down, all the energy shifts entirely too. Who gets the public anger? Is it the president for being inflexible? Or is it Congress for failing to legislate? But the documents make it really clear that media framing plays an absolutely central role in shaping who the public ultimately holds responsible for the chaos that follows.
Okay, now let's expand our view quickly, because Washington's instability, it doesn't just stay home, does it? It carries a heavy price tag and a major reputational risk on the world stage. This was covered extensively in the economic and global sources we reviewed. The immediate financial risk is, well, severe. Analysts cite the 2011 precedent, specifically noting that credit rating agencies might downgrade U.S. debt if this crisis continues. If our basic ability to manage our finances is questioned like that, well, that kind of instability immediately spooks the financial markets. It leads to stock market volatility and significant worry among foreign investors who hold U.S. debt.
Yeah, this domestic instability causes real market mechanisms to shift. It's not just abstract. When confidence drops, you see volatility in treasury markets, U.S. government bonds, which are supposed to be the safest asset on earth. A drop in stability there ripples through global banking systems. It's fundamental. The instability essentially increases the cost of government borrowing over time because the market demands a higher risk premium to hold U.S. debt. It costs taxpayers more.
And this instability has profound international consequences too, right? What do the sources say about allies and adversaries?
Well, allies immediately question America's stability, predictability. When it demonstrates it can't even manage to pass a basic operating budget. Think about NATO partners, for example. They rely on the predictable flow of U.S. funds, U.S. material, U.S. commitments. Shutdowns disrupt that. And while our allies worry, our adversaries, they seize the opportunity. China and Russia in particular use these shutdowns as key propaganda points. It's prime material for them. And it's not just criticism. They explicitly use it to undermine faith in democratic processes globally. They argue, basically, that democracies are inherently too unstable, too chaotic to manage a modern state effectively. It becomes a direct geopolitical weapon against the U.S. model. And when you just summarize the cost to our own economy, the numbers are pretty stark. Shutdowns demonstrably slow GDP growth. That's clear from past events. And perhaps most importantly, for the long term, consumer confidence drops sharply. People get nervous, they spend less. The sources project that a prolonged shutdown, maybe a month or more, could cost the U.S. economy somewhere between $6 to $8 billion a week.
Wow. Okay, so given all this pressure, let's look at the outlook. What happens next? The source material seems to define two extremes for you, the listener. The best case scenario, obviously, is always that some last-minute deal is struck. Likely a short-term CR may be hammered out in the final hours, averting the shutdown narrowly. This allows negotiations to continue, basically kicks the can down the road, but at least it keeps the government funded for a bit longer.
But the worst case scenario, that's a prolonged shutdown. One that could last weeks, even months. This could lead federal workers to miss multiple paychecks, creating just catastrophic financial instability for hundreds of thousands of households. And, perhaps more fundamentally, completely eroding the public's confidence in government's ability to function at all. Beyond those immediate missed paychecks, the real long-term damage cited repeatedly in the sources is this erosion of institutional memory and competence. Good federal employees, talented people, they get tired of being treated like a political football, worried about consistent pay. They just leave. They go find more stable employment in the private sector, and that loss of expertise, that brain drain, it slows government function long after the lights eventually turn back on. It takes years to recover that.
Which is precisely why the sources also mention proposed reforms, ideas designed specifically to prevent this endless damaging cycle. What are the main legislative fixes being considered?
Well, one of the most common ideas you see pop up is automatic budget extensions, sometimes called the Keep the Government Running Act or something similar. The concept is pretty simple. If Congress fails to pass a budget by the deadline, funding automatically continues at the previous year's level, maybe with some adjustments, until a new budget is passed. This essentially removes the shutdown threat as that primary bargaining chip. Another reform mentioned is using a bipartisan commission, maybe, to manage budget disputes, taking the intense negotiations out of the immediate political heat of the Capitol floor, trying to find common ground away from the cameras.
That is a phenomenal deep dive into a very complex and, frankly, a pretty terrifying situation brewing.
Yeah.
If we pull back just to synthesize this for everyone listening, the core theme of this government shutdown battle, it really isn't just about money or policy differences, is it? It is ultimately about trust and functionality.
Absolutely. I think the central question raised implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, by the source material is stark. If the world's richest, arguably most powerful democracy can't manage to keep its own lights on, keep its essential services funded without resorting to this kind of hostage-taking, what does that truly say about the long-term future and the reliability of America as a global power, as an example?
It's a heavy question, and it really defines the entire political climate right now. And since the sources frame these shutdowns so clearly as a calculated political tool, this leaves you, our listener, with an important thought to maybe explore on your own. Are shutdowns a necessary, albeit painful, lever for political change? A way to give minority viewpoints real power to force compromise on issues they deeply care about? Or are they actually a dangerous failure of institutional governance, something that fundamentally erodes the very foundation of government competence, and maybe even public faith in democracy itself? Something to consider as this showdown continues in the weeks ahead.